The halls of Crestview High were always bustling during the day, filled with students chatting about everything from homework to the latest trends. But at night, it was an entirely different place. It transformed into something eerie, unsettling, and worst of all, haunted. At least, that's what the rumors said. I never believed them, of course. I mean, who really believes in haunted schools? Ghost stories were just things kids made up to pass the time or scare each other. At least, that's what I thought until I had to stay late one night for a group project. It was the beginning of October, and the days were growing shorter. The chill of autumn had settled in, and the leaves outside were turning shades of gold and crimson. My friends, Sarah and Jason, and I were working on a history project that was due at the end of the week. We figured we'd stay after school to finish it up, but time got away from us. By the time we realized how late it was, the sun had already set. We were in a library, a room that seemed far less inviting at night. The long wooden tables, normally filled with students studying or goofing off, were empty, and the towering bookshelves cast long, dark shadows. The overhead lights flickered now and then, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. "Okay, I think that's enough for tonight," Jason said, yawning as he stretched his arms over his head. "I'm getting tired." Sarah nodded, gathering her notes. "Yeah, we should head out. I don't want to be here when the janitor locks up." I packed up my things, but just as we were about to leave, a loud thump echoed through the hallway outside the library. We all froze. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. "I'm sure it's nothing," Jason said, though his tone didn't sound as confident as his words. "Maybe just the wind or something." The three of us glanced at each other, and despite every instinct telling me to ignore it and go home, something in me felt drawn to the noise. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was just the thrill of doing something stupid. But before I knew it, I was walking toward the door. "Wait," Sarah hissed, grabbing my arm. "What are you doing?" "I just want to check it out," I said, shrugging her off. "It's probably nothing." Jason sighed. "If you're going, we're all going. We don't need you disappearing into some creepy hallway by yourself." With that, we stepped out into the empty corridor, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the walls. The school looked entirely different at night. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, and the lockers, which seemed so ordinary during the day, looked like ominous sentinels in the dim light. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was irrational, but it gnawed at me, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I tried to push the thought aside and focus on finding the source of the noise. The hall was completely silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the lights overhead and the soft squeak of our shoes against the tile floor. We passed by classroom after classroom, each one dark and empty, their doors slightly ajar. And then we heard it again thump. It was louder this time, coming from somewhere near the old gym. We turned the corner, and that's when we saw it. The door to the gym was cracked open, just slightly, but enough for us to see inside. There was something moving in the darkness, a shadow that seemed to flicker and shift as though it were alive. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Yeah," Jason muttered, his eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Let's check it out." Jason grabbed my arm. "Are you crazy? We should get out of here." But it was too late. I had already stepped forward, pushing the gym door open a little further. The room beyond was almost pitch black, save for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the high windows. At first, I didn't see anything. The gym looked just as it always had, rows of bleachers along the walls, the basketball court stretching out before us. But then, something moved in the shadows. A figure, tall and gaunt, stood at the far end of the gym. It was facing away from us, its back turned as it stared at the wall. Its head hung low, and its long, thin arms dangled at its sides. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I whispered back, my voice shaking. "But we need to leave. Now." We turned to run, but as we did, the gym door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. The sound echoed through the room, and the figure at the end of the gym began to move. Slowly at first, but then faster, its footsteps heavy as it sprinted toward us. Panic surged through me, and I bolted for the door. I grabbed the handle and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked, trapping us inside with whatever that thing was. "Help me," I shouted, yanking at the door as hard as I could. Jason and Sarah rushed to my side, pulling on the handle with me, but it was no use. The door wouldn't open. Behind us, the figure was getting closer, its footsteps pounding against the floor. We were out of time. With no other options, we ran. We darted toward the bleachers, hoping to hide, but as we scrambled up the steps, the figure's footsteps stopped. I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest, expecting to see it standing right behind us. But the gym was empty. The figure was gone. "What the hell?" Jason gasped, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "Where did it go?" "I don't know," I whispered, my voice trembling. "But we need to get out of here." We waited for what felt like hours, huddled together on the bleachers, too afraid to move. Eventually, the gym door creaked open on its own, the faint glow of the hallway light spilling into the room. We didn't waste any time. We bolted for the exit, not daring to look back. By the time we reached the front of the school, the parking lot was empty. The night was still, and the cold autumn air bit at our skin. We didn't speak as we climbed into Jason's car and sped away from Crestview High, but the silence between us was heavy with fear. None of us ever talked about that night again. We pretended it never happened, went on with our lives as if everything was normal. But I could never shake the feeling that we weren't alone in that gym. That whatever was in there with us was still watching, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I swear I can still hear those footsteps, slow and heavy, echoing through the dark hallways of Crestview High. But I'll never go back to find out. The pep rallies at Westbrook High were legendary. Every fall, the football team would march into the gym, the crowd would go wild, and the cheerleaders would perform stunts that left everyone on their feet. It was a tradition, something that every student looked forward to. But after what happened last year, everything changed. I remember that day like it was yesterday, though I wish I could forget it. My best friend, Lily, was one of the most popular girls in school. She was the captain of the cheerleading squad, smart, funny, and beautiful. Everyone adored her, and she had a way of lighting up any room she walked into. That day was no different. The pep rally was set for a Friday afternoon in late October. The leaves had turned shades of red and gold, and the crisp autumn air was beginning to creep into the school. Everyone was excited. Students, teachers, the football team, everyone. But there was something different about that day. something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I remember feeling a strange sense of unease, like a storm was brewing, even though the sky outside was clear. We all filed into the gym, just like we always did. The bleachers were packed, the band was playing, and the cheerleaders were warming up on the floor. The gym was buzzing with energy, but that weird feeling stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. Lily was at the center of it all, as usual. She was leading the squad, her long blonde hair pulled back into a high ponytail, her blue and white cheer uniform perfectly pressed. She flashed me a smile from across the gym, and I waved back, trying to shake off the strange feeling that something was wrong. The rally began as it always did, with the principal giving a speech about school spirit, followed by a performance from the marching band. The football team took the stage next, the crowd roaring as they walked onto the gym floor. And then it was the cheerleaders' turn. I watched as Lily led her team through their routine, flipping and tumbling across the floor like she was weightless. She made everything look so easy, like she was born to be in the spotlight. But then, halfway through their performance, something happened. It was subtle at first. A flicker of the lights overhead, like the power was about to go out. No one else seemed to notice, but I did. I looked around, expecting to see the teachers or the principal react, but everyone's attention was on the cheerleaders. Then the lights flickered again, longer this time, casting strange shadows across the gym. A murmur went through the crowd, and the cheerleaders hesitated for a moment before continuing their routine. But that feeling of unease I'd had all day, it was getting stronger, like a weight pressing down on my chest. And then it happened. Lily was about to throw a backflip, one of her signature moves. She launched herself into the air, her body twisting and flipping with perfect precision. But in the middle of her flip, the lights went out completely. The gym was plunged into darkness, and for a moment, everything was silent. The crowd stopped cheering, the music stopped playing, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then the lights flickered back on. The gym was exactly as it had been before, except for one thing. Lily was gone. At first, no one seemed to notice. The rest of the cheerleaders stood frozen, looking around in confusion. The crowd started murmuring, but it took a few moments for everyone to realize what had just happened. Lily, one of the cheerleaders called, her voice shaky. Where did she go? But Lily was nowhere to be found. The gym erupted into chaos. The principal tried to calm everyone down, the football team rushed onto the floor, and the cheerleaders scattered, frantically searching for Lily, but she was gone. It was like she had vanished into thin air. I pushed my way through the crowd, my heart racing. I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just a prank or a stunt. Something had happened to Lily, something terrible. I found the spot where she had been standing before the lights went out. There was nothing there. No sign of her at all. Just the cold, hard floor. Where is she? I heard someone shout. She's got to be here somewhere, another voice said, but I knew better. Lily was gone. The rest of that day was a blur. The principal cancelled the rest of the rally, and the police were called in to search the school. They questioned everyone, but no one knew what had happened. The security cameras in the gym had malfunctioned, and the footage was useless. There were no witnesses, no clues, nothing. For weeks, the entire town was in an uproar. Search parties were organized. The news stations ran stories about Lily's disappearance, and everyone was talking about it. But no one could explain how a girl could just vanish in the middle of a crowded gym without a trace. I tried to move on, to focus on school and forget about what had happened. but it wasn't that easy. Every day, I walked through the halls of Westbrook High, feeling like something was watching me, and every night, I dreamed about that moment, the flicker of the lights, the sound of the crowd, and the empty spot on the gym floor where Lily had been. It wasn't until a month later that things got worse. I was sitting in the cafeteria with my friends, trying to act normal, when I got a text. It was from an unknown number, and it just said, "I'm still here." I stared at my phone, my hands shaking. I wanted to believe it was just a prank, that someone was messing with me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises outside my window, like footsteps on the roof. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, but the sound was too deliberate, too real. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another text from the same number. "Come to the gym." I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I didn't want to go. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to stay away, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to know. I grabbed my coat and slipped out of the house, my breath visible in the cold night air. The school was only a few blocks away, but the walk felt like it took hours. By the time I reached the front doors of Westbrook High, my legs were shaking, and I could barely keep my hands steady. The gym was dark and empty, just like it had been the night Lily disappeared. I stood in the doorway, my pulse pounding in my ears, and then I saw her. She was standing at the far end of the gym, right where she had vanished. Her back was to me, her long blonde hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She was wearing the same cheer uniform from the day she disappeared. "Lily," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She didn't move. I took a step forward, my heart in my throat. "Lily, is that you?" Slowly, she turned to face me. But it wasn't Lily. Her face, it was distorted, like a twisted version of her, with hollow, dark eyes and a smile that sent chills down my spine. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice echoing through the empty gym. I froze, my feet rooted to the spot. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move, and then she vanished. The gym was empty again, just like before. But I knew what I had seen. It wasn't Lily. It was something else. Something pretending to be her. I never told anyone about that night. I couldn't. No one would believe me. But I know the truth. Lily is still out there, somewhere. But she's not the same. And whatever is haunting Westbrook High, it's not going to stop. It's still here, waiting for its next victim. And I'm afraid I might be next. Mill Creek High School was built on a foundation of secrets. A sprawling, old brick building that had been standing since the early 1900s, it was the kind of place that had seen generations pass through its doors. Students joked about it being haunted, but no one ever took the rumors seriously, at least not until last year. I was a junior then. Just another face in the sea of students trying to survive high school. My days were spent going from class to class, doing my homework, and hanging out with my friends, Emily and Jake. None of us were particularly popular, but we weren't outcasts either. We were just your average high school kids, doing what we could to get by without drawing too much attention to ourselves. But everything changed when the new gym opened. The old gym at Mill Creek had been falling apart for years. The roof leaked, the floors were warped, and the bleachers creaked with every step. So when the school board finally approved the construction of a brand new state-of-the-art gymnasium, everyone was excited. It was a big deal, a fresh start for our crumbling school. Construction took almost 2 years, and when the new gym was finally finished, it was a sight to behold. Shiny hardwood floors, bright overhead lights, brand new lockers, and pristine bleachers. It was perfect. The first week of school, everyone was buzzing with excitement about it, especially the athletes. The basketball team, the volleyball team, the cheerleaders, everyone was looking forward to using the new facility. And that's when the rumors started. It began as whispers, just like it always does. People saying they'd heard strange noises coming from the locker room late at night. Others claimed to have seen shadowy figures moving through the gym when it was supposed to be empty. Most of us brushed it off as typical high school gossip. After all, every old building has its ghost stories, right? But then things started happening. The first incident happened to a girl named Sarah. She was on the volleyball team, one of the first groups to start practicing in the new gym. One day after practice, she was in the locker room alone, getting ready to leave. According to her, the lights flickered, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw someone standing behind her. But when she turned around, no one was there. Sarah didn't stick around to investigate. She grabbed her stuff and ran out of the locker room as fast as she could. By the time she got to the parking lot, she was in tears, telling anyone who would listen about the shadowy figure she'd seen. Of course, most people didn't believe her. They said she was just tired from practice. Maybe her eyes were playing tricks on her. But Sarah was convinced that something wasn't right about that gym. After that, she refused to go back in there alone. Then it happened again. This time, it was one of the basketball players, a guy named Ethan. He was staying late after school to shoot hoops, trying to get some extra practice in before the big game. According to Ethan, he was the only one in the gym that night, at least. That's what he thought. He said he was shooting free throws when he heard the sound of someone running behind him. He turned around, but there was no one there. The gym was completely empty. He went back to his game, but the footsteps kept coming, getting closer and closer until they were right behind him. Ethan ran out of the gym, leaving his basketball behind. He never told anyone what he saw. But after that, he refused to stay late for practice anymore. By now, the rumors were impossible to ignore. People started talking about how the new gym had been built on top of the old school's basement, a part of the building that had been sealed off for decades. No one knew why it had been closed, but the stories ranged from accidental deaths during construction to cover-ups of something darker. One thing was clear. Something wasn't right about that gym. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Emily, Jake, and I started talking about it more, trying to figure out if there was any truth to the rumors. Jake, being the adventurous one, suggested we check it out for ourselves. I wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea, but curiosity got the better of me. We agreed to go after school one Friday, when most of the students and staff had already left for the weekend. It was risky. If we got caught, we'd be in serious trouble, but we were determined to get to the bottom of whatever was happening in that gym. That afternoon, we waited until the halls were clear before sneaking into the gym. The place was eerily quiet. The only sound the faint hum of the overhead lights. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Jake led the way, of course, with Emily and me following closely behind. We made our way toward the locker room, our footsteps echoing in the empty space. When we reached the door, Jake hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The locker room was just as we'd expected, bright, clean, and empty. But there was something about it that made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the fact that Sarah had seen something in here, or maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should have. Jake, ever the fearless leader, walked over to the row of lockers and started opening them one by one. "Come on, guys, there's nothing here," he said, his voice bouncing off the tile walls. Emily and I exchanged a nervous glance, but we didn't say anything. We both knew better than to argue with Jake when he got like this. But then, as Jake opened one of the lockers, something strange happened. The lights flickered. Just for a second, the room was plunged into darkness, and when the lights came back on, everything looked the same. Except for one thing. There was writing on the mirror. I didn't see who noticed it first, but suddenly all three of us were staring at the mirror on the far wall, where someone, or something, had scrawled the words "Leave now" in what looked like red lipstick. My heart started racing, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. "Jake, we need to get out of here," I whispered, my voice barely audible. But Jake just stood there, staring at the mirror like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Jake," Emily grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. "We need to go now." That's when we heard it. A loud bang from behind us, like something had slammed into one of the lockers. We all spun around, but there was no one there, just rows of lockers, silent and still. And then the banging started again, louder this time, coming from multiple directions at once. Without another word, the three of us bolted for the door. We didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping for breath in the cool evening air. None of us said anything for a long time, just stood there in shock, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Jake was the first to speak. "What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I don't know," I replied, my heart still pounding in my chest. "But whatever it was, I don't think it wanted us there." We never went back to the gym after that. The rumors continued to spread, but we kept our experience to ourselves. Whatever was haunting that place, it was real, and we weren't about to go looking for it again. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I still hear the sound of footsteps echoing in the empty halls of Mill Creek High, and I wonder if whatever was in that gym is still there, waiting for its next victim. Because one thing is for sure, Mill Creek High has its secrets, and some of them are better left buried. Millbrook High School, a place that seemed so ordinary, a typical American high school where students bustled through hallways, lockers slammed shut, and life unfolded in predictable patterns. But deep within its structure, in the farthest reaches of its old wing, a secret lay hidden. A secret so dark that only whispers of its existence ever made their way out into the light. This secret resided in the heart of the chemistry lab, a room notorious for eerie occurrences that had plagued the school for decades. And one fateful night, my friends and I became tangled in its terrifying grasp. It was my senior year at Millbrook, and like every other student nearing the end of their high school life, I had grown bored. Bored of the same classes, the same people, the same mundane routine. My friends, Brandon, Jessica, and I often talked about shaking things up, doing something reckless, something thrilling before we all graduated and went our separate ways. We'd all heard about the chemistry lab's spooky reputation. Students whispering about flickering lights, strange noises, and even shadows that didn't belong to anyone. It was perfect for a bit of adrenaline. Jessica was the first one to suggest that we investigate the lab at night, after everyone had gone home. Brandon, being the impulsive risk-taker he always was, immediately agreed. I wasn't so sure. I'd always been more cautious, and stories of haunted school buildings didn't exactly scream fun to me. But they both goaded me, saying it would be a last hurrah before we left for college. I eventually caved in. We made our plan on a Thursday. It was simple enough. Meet in the parking lot after 9 p.m. when the janitors had finished their rounds, sneak in through the back entrance near the science wing, and head straight for the chemistry lab. The old wing wasn't locked up as tightly as the newer parts of the school, and we knew the janitors didn't check it as often because the classes there had been moved to the modern building years ago. As the day wore on, I started to get a bad feeling. It wasn't fear exactly, more like an unshakable sense that we were going to regret this. But I pushed it aside, convincing myself that I was just being overly cautious. At 9:15 that night, we were all standing in the shadow of the massive oak tree near the back entrance, whispering and giggling nervously like kids pulling off a prank. Brandon led the way, picking the lock on the old door with a credit card like he'd seen in countless YouTube videos. It took him longer than expected, but eventually, we were inside. The atmosphere inside the old wing was entirely different from the rest of the school. The air was thick with dust, the kind that made you want to sneeze with every breath. The lights in the hallway flickered weakly, casting long, wavering shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. It was silent to silent. No hum of vending machines or distant chatter from the janitorial staff. Just nothing. We made our way through the narrow hallway, our footsteps echoing unnervingly in the empty building. Brandon, naturally, walked ahead, while Jessica and I followed, trying not to spook ourselves. As we approached the door to the chemistry lab, I could feel my pulse quickening. The lab door was slightly ajar, something I hadn't expected. I shot a glance at Brandon, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he pushed the door open. The room itself was like any other chemistry lab. Long counters lined with Bunsen burners, glass beakers stacked haphazardly on the shelves, and stools neatly tucked beneath the workstations. But it felt wrong, like the room was waiting for something. For us, maybe. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild. But there was no denying the shift in the air. It was colder in here too. Not freezing, but colder than it should have been for a spring night. Brandon strode into the center of the room, acting like he owned the place, while Jessica and I hesitated near the door. "Okay, so what now?" I whispered, not wanting to break the unnatural stillness that clung to the room. "Now we find out what all the fuss is about," Brandon grinned, pulling out his phone to record the whole thing. He panned the camera around the room, narrating in his best horror movie voice. "Here we are, in the most haunted part of Millbrook High." "Brandon, shut up," Jessica hissed. "This isn't a joke." But he didn't listen. He started walking around, pretending to investigate, knocking on the walls, even opening one of the cupboards to prove that nothing was hiding inside. That's when it happened. One of the glass beakers, sitting innocently on the counter, slid across the surface on its own. I froze. I know what I saw. There was no wind, no draft, nothing that could have moved it. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Yeah," Jessica whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Even Brandon, always the skeptic, had stopped grinning. "It's just a trick of the light," he said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. But then the beaker fell off the counter and shattered on the floor. And that was just the beginning. Before we could process what had just happened, the lights overhead flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for several long seconds before blinking back to life. In the brief moments of darkness, I thought I saw something, movement in the shadows, something lurking in the corners of the room. My heart pounded in my chest, and I grabbed Jessica's arm. "We need to leave," I whispered urgently, but my voice sounded foreign in my ears, like it wasn't mine. Suddenly, the door to the supply closet in the corner of the room slammed shut, even though no one had touched it. Brandon jumped, his bravado crumbling as he stumbled back toward us. "Okay, maybe we should go," he said, his voice tight with fear. We backed toward the exit, but before we could reach the door, every single cabinet in the room flew open with a loud bang. Beakers and test tubes crashed to the floor, shattering into a million tiny shards. The air grew heavier, almost oppressive, and it was becoming harder to breathe. Jessica was practically clinging to me now, her face pale with terror. Then we heard it, a low, guttural whisper, coming from somewhere in the room. "Get out." That was all we needed to hear. Without a second thought, we bolted for the door. But as soon as Brandon reached for the handle, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. We were trapped. Panic set in, my heart hammering in my chest as I frantically searched for another way out. But there was no other door, no window we could open. We were stuck in the lab, with whatever was in there with us. The lights began flickering again, casting the room in intermittent shadows. In those brief moments of darkness, I saw them figures, shadowy and indistinct, moving in the periphery of my vision. But every time the lights came back on, they were gone. "What do we do?" Jessica cried, her voice barely audible over the sound of glass crunching beneath our feet. Brandon was silent for a moment, his face as white as a sheet. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice trembling. And then the whispering started again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. "Out, out, get out." The voices seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the walls, surrounding us. "We have to break the door down," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "It's our only chance." Brandon nodded, and together, we threw ourselves against the door with all our strength. The first attempt barely budged it, but after 3 or 4 tries, the door finally gave way with a loud crack. We stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath, and without looking back, we ran. We didn't stop running until we were outside, standing under the cold, clear night sky, our hearts racing, our bodies shaking with adrenaline. None of us spoke for a long time, too scared to even process what had just happened. Finally, Jessica broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," Brandon said quietly, staring back at the building as if it might reach out and pull us back inside. We never spoke about that night again. Not to each other, not to anyone. We told ourselves that we'd imagined it, that it had been some sort of collective hallucination brought on by our own fear and excitement. But deep down, I knew the truth. The chemistry lab was haunted, and whatever lived in there didn't want us poking around. A few weeks later, the old wing was officially closed off for good. The administration said it was due to structural issues, but I knew better. They were keeping something locked inside, something that had been disturbed when they built the new wing. I don't know what we unleashed that night, but I do know this. Some places are better left alone. And Millbrook High's chemistry lab is one of them. The last place I ever expected to experience true horror was my high school. But what happened in the forgotten wing of our school will haunt me for the rest of my life. I never believed in the paranormal or in the rumors that circulated about the closed off section of Rockvale High. It was just another hallway, I thought. A forgotten part of the school that nobody used anymore. But that was before I saw it with my own eyes. Now, I'm not so sure what I believe. It started as a joke, something to do out of boredom during our final year. My group of friends, Tom, Sabrina, and Jenny, were always looking for thrills, ways to entertain ourselves in the slow, dull days leading up to graduation. We had all heard the stories about the old wing at the far end of the school. It had been closed for years, with no one allowed inside. The school claimed it was due to asbestos or some other structural issue, but the rumors were far more interesting. Students whispered about strange noises coming from the wing late at night, about figures seen moving behind the windows when no one was supposed to be there. Some even said that a student had gone missing there years ago and was never found. But like most high school rumors, it was just a tale passed down to scare the freshmen. We didn't believe any of it. Not really. But one Friday afternoon, after classes had let out and the school was nearly empty, Tom brought it up again. We were sitting on the bleachers by the football field, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It had been a lazy day, the kind where nothing exciting seemed to happen. "Hey," Tom said, grinning mischievously, "why don't we check out the old wing tonight?" Sabrina rolled her eyes, clearly not impressed. "That place is boarded up. How are we supposed to get in?" "I heard there's a window in the back that's still loose," Tom replied, leaning in with that familiar gleam in his eye that always meant trouble. "We could get in through there. Come on, it'll be fun. We can finally see if all those stories are true." Jenny, always up for a bit of excitement, grinned. I've always wanted to see what's back there," Sabrina sighed, but even she couldn't resist. "Fine, but if we get caught, I'm blaming you, Tom." I hesitated, feeling a knot form in my stomach. The old wing had always freaked me out a little, but I didn't want to be the only one backing out. Besides, it would just be an empty hallway. Nothing to worry about. "Right, all right," I said finally. We met up later that night after the janitors had finished their rounds. The school was quiet, eerily so, with only the distant hum of the air conditioning units breaking the silence. The back entrance to the school was unlocked. Tom had seen to that earlier in the day, and we slipped inside and noticed. The hallway leading to the old wing was dimly lit, with only a few flickering bulbs casting long shadows on the floor. As we made our way toward the boarded up doors, the air grew colder. The temperature drop was noticeable, and I rubbed my arms to ward off the chill. Sabrina, who was walking beside me, shivered and muttered something about it being colder than usual for late spring. Tom led us around the side of the wing, where, sure enough, one of the windows was loose. With some effort, he pried it open, and one by one, we climbed through into the old wing. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was stale, like a room that hadn't been opened in years, with a faint hint of something rotting. Dust clung to every surface, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like forgotten decorations. The hallway stretched out before us, long and narrow, with doors on either side leading to empty classrooms. The only sound was the faint echo of our footsteps as we made our way deeper into the wing. The atmosphere was oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. though I told myself it was just nerves. "This place is creepy as hell," Jenny whispered, her voice barely audible in the thick silence. "Yeah, no kidding," Sabrina agreed, her usual bravado nowhere to be found. Tom, however, seemed unfazed. He led the way with his flashlight, peering into the darkened classrooms as we passed. Most of them were empty, just old desks and chairs covered in dust, but something about the place felt off. It was as if the building had absorbed the years of neglect, turning it into something wrong. We came to the end of the hallway, where a single door stood slightly ajar. Unlike the others, this one didn't look like it had been touched in years. The wood was warped and cracked, and a faded sign on the door read Room 314. Tom, always the daring one, pushed the door open without hesitation. The room beyond was small, barely more than a storage closet, but it was what was inside that sent a chill down my spine. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols that looked like they had been scratched into the plaster with something sharp. In the center of the room, a single desk stood, and on it sat an old notebook, its pages yellowed with age. "Whoa, what is this?" Jenny asked, stepping into the room behind Tom. "I don't know," Tom replied, picking up the notebook and flipping through the pages. "Looks like someone was writing in here a long time ago." Sabrina and I exchanged uneasy glances, the knot in my stomach tightening. There was something about the symbols on the walls that unnerved me, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. They were crude, almost childlike, but they exuded a sense of malice. "Let's get out of here," Sabrina said suddenly. "This place is giving me the creeps." "Wait, I want to see what's in the notebook," Tom insisted, his eyes scanning the pages. I moved closer to him, peering over his shoulder. The handwriting was messy, scrawled in a shaky hand, and the entries seemed to be ramblings, disjointed thoughts about the school, the teachers, and something called the Watcher. "What the hell is the Watcher?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Tom shook his head. "I don't know, but it sounds like whoever wrote this was losing it." As he flipped to the last page, I noticed something else, a drawing, crude and hurried, of a figure standing in the doorway of what looked like the very room we were in. The figure was tall and dark, its features indistinguishable, but there was something about it that filled me with dread. "Okay, we're done here," I said, my voice shaking. "Let's go." But as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. Jenny screamed, and Tom dropped the notebook, his face pale with fear. Sabrina grabbed the doorknob and twisted it, but it wouldn't budge. We were trapped. The temperature in the room plummeted, and the air grew thick with an almost tangible sense of malevolence. I could feel it. Something was in the room with us, watching, waiting. The symbols on the wall seemed to pulse, as if they were alive, and the sound of scratching filled the air. It was coming from behind the walls, slow and deliberate, like something trying to claw its way out. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. "Help me with the door," Sabrina shouted. But no matter how hard we pulled or pushed, it wouldn't open. Then the whispering started. Low, barely audible at first, but growing louder with each passing second. It was a voice, no voices, speaking in a language I didn't understand, but the intent was clear. They wanted us gone, or worse. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered, and for a brief moment, the figure from the drawing was there, standing in the doorway. Tall, dark, and featureless, it loomed over us, its presence suffocating. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. The door burst open, and we didn't waste a second. We ran, tearing down the hallway as fast as our legs could carry us. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. We didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping for breath, our hearts pounding in our chests. None of us spoke as we stood there, staring back at the school. The old wing was dark and silent, as if nothing had happened, but we knew better. We had felt it, seen it. Something was in there, something that had been waiting for years. We never spoke about that night again. The school eventually demolished the old wing, claiming it was for safety reasons, but I knew the truth. They were trying to bury something, something that should never have been disturbed. But even now, years later, I still dream about that hallway, about the symbols on the walls, and about the watcher, standing in the doorway waiting, always waiting,